Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter and analyst for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. On today's episode, I want to talk through Cameron Carr's introductory press conference. I was there earlier today, and he spoke to the media for about 10 minutes. I want to go through what we learned and my thoughts on that. Then I want to get into free agent bargains. We've been focusing on the Lakers center pursuit and the wing pursuit, but that's been in a starting context. That's been trying to find long-term fits around Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, guys that the Lakers can either sign with their cap space or potentially trade for. But I think the Lakers are going to need to hit on some of these back-end roster guys. This has been a weakness for LA for quite some time. I've talked about this multiple times before, but if you look at LA's 10 through 15 spots on the roster over the past half decade, that has been a real weakness for the front office in terms of identifying some of these minimum guys or even some of the younger guys that they have tested out in terms of two-ways or second-round picks, whatever. So this is an area LA is going to have to improve on this season. JJ Redick talked about it at exit interviews coming out of the season. So I think this is going to be a real point of emphasis for them. And I think they're going to need to depart from their typical try to be like the second or third home for a former lottery pick. Now, there are a couple of former lottery picks on this list, so I will be, breaking that rule a little bit here. But for the most part, I am looking at guys that were either undrafted or second-round picks or have bounced around multiple places for a variety of reasons, but guys that don't necessarily fit the traditional mold of the typical Lakers signing, the typical Lakers minimum signing. So I think they need to be focusing on guys with specific skill sets and guys who check multiple boxes, which I will be talking through. But before we get into it, shout out to the chat, shout out to the Late Night Gang. We did have some breaking news right before the show. Isaiah Hartenstein, the Thunder are declining his team option for $28 million, and he's going to be resigning on a 3-year, $75 million deal with them. So Isaiah Hartenstein is officially off the board. We talked about it last night with Kobe Price. It was unlikely that he ever hit unrestricted free agency because OKC was in control with that team option, and the only way he was going to be an unrestricted free agent was if they declined that, which it made zero sense to decline that and let him test the market. So figured the only way he would technically have that option declined would be if it was a situation where he was re-signing. So, maybe there could have been a scenario in which OKC just looked at their cap situation. They're still $18.8 million above the second apron, and they're like, hey, we just drafted Mara. We have several centers on the roster. iHeart's a little too expensive. Let's move on and just save some money. But instead, they are getting a slight discount with him, saving that $3 million or so. Probably end up declining the team option on Kenrich Williams, and then also have a decision to make with Lou Dort. Of course, earlier today, they flipped Isaiah Joe to the Pistons for 2 second-round picks. Teams keep helping OKC facilitate. I mean, that's honestly shows, I think that's a testament to OKC's front office, where like they're trying to salary dump and they're still getting assets for the salary dumps because they have good players on good contracts. And that's where like having that depth at the back end of your roster, like the Lakers are in a similar position with Jared Vanderbilt where they would love to salary dump him, but they're not getting 2 second round picks for Jared Vanderbilt. If they dump him, they're going to have to be giving up the equivalent of, I think, a minimum of like 2 second round picks, but the Lakers don't even have 2 second round picks to trade. So that's where they probably have to give up something around like a first round pick. So I mean, that OKC, we'll see how they reshape things if Dort becomes available or not, but that was the breaking news before we started. So in terms of Cameron Carr's introductory press conference, it happened at 2:30 Pacific time today. I spoke to the media for about 10 minutes. I was in the building, and I will say I came away very impressed with Cameron Carr's just awareness and perspective. And I mean, I would say this is the most impressive like rookie press conference I can remember, probably dating back to Max Christie, and just his breakdown of his own game. And, so I asked him, for those who aren't familiar with his game or just know his game a little bit, what would you say? And he kept that answer pretty short. He said, I'm explosive, I'm dominant, and I love to dunk the ball and block shots. So that is a little peek into his game. But then as he talked about it more through different questions, he talked about playing off of the ball more and how in high school, he came up with one of the top high school point guards in the country. So he was used to playing off of the ball, and that he thinks that's a strength in his game, and playing off of Luka and Austin and potentially LeBron, that he's like, my job's easy. I just have to continually move. I have to cut. I have to dunk and finish at the rim. I have to make open threes. I have to get out in transition. And I just thought his perspective was refreshing. I thought a lot of his answers were the type of answers that you wanted to hear. And again, that's not always how these things go. Sometimes it's a little awkward. Sometimes the guy has an outsized view of themselves, or it's just not congruent with what the team is looking for. And certainly I think as time has passed, like, players have become more media trained, and players nowadays are more media trained than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. But there was an element of that, right? Like, clearly he is media trained to some degree, but I thought I liked a lot of his answers. And I think one thing that really stood out was just how excited he is through this process. And he opened up the presser by thanking everybody, like, for the opportunity to just be there, like, talk to him, and just about the history of the Lakers franchise, and walking through the practice facility and seeing the photos and the jerseys in the rafters, and just seeing all the history with the franchise, and just being in the NBA for arguably the most historic franchise in the NBA. Like, you could just tell there was that there was almost like a puppy dog nature to him. But again, in terms of the act, like, there's going to be stuff where they talk about, like, I don't get as much into, like, the psychological side necessarily. I focus more on the basketball answers. And from the basketball perspective, again, it was talking about playing off of the stars, understanding that he's going to be an off-ball player, and also talking about his defense. He mentioned that he was asked about, like, what he thinks he has to do from day one to get on the floor, and if he's willing to adapt his game. And he immediately said, I know I have to step up on defense. I need to defend at a higher level, and I want to be the best defender on the team. And it's a long shot that he will be, based on where he's at currently defensively compared to, like, a guy like Marcus Smart or something. But that's the type of attitude you do want to hear, the type of perspective, the type of outlook you want from a rookie. So I just thought he came off as the right mix of hungry and also with a level of self-awareness that I felt what was refreshing. But he also talked about living in the weight room. He said that, like, it was like, what was what's the primary thing you're looking to work on this summer? What's the thing you need to address? Immediately said strength and weight, and putting on mass and being in the gym every single day. And he said the weight room was going to be his second home. So that's another thing where at just 184 pounds, he's got the physical tools, he's got the vertical leap, he's got the long arms, but he clearly needs to gain 10 to 15 pounds for that size, and also maintain that athleticism, which that can be tricky to do, right? You see guys sometimes bulk up and then they're not as quick, not as explosive, can't jump as high. Maybe that even leads to injuries. So it's going to be a process. It's going to be, you don't want him to gain the 15 pounds in like a month, because that could lead to a potential injury. It's got to be, I think, a multi-month process leading into October, and we'll see where his body is at that point. But again, I just thought, guys don't always answer questions the right way. Guys aren't always as self-aware as I thought he came off. And I thought, like, I just think that especially with how some of the recent picks have gone for the Lakers, I at least thought he won the press conference, which only matters so much. You actually have to go out and perform and deliver, and he's got to go out and have a nice summer league, and he's got to build off that, build up his body, go into training camp, go into the preseason, and continue to improve, right? So none of this really matters. Like, if he's great in front of a microphone, it does not necessarily translate to on the floor, but we're not at that stage yet. We will judge him once he gets the summer league. We'll judge him in the training camp and preseason and whatnot. But for now, at least, I thought he had a solid press conference where I just liked most of his answers and his perspective. Of note, Rob Pelinka did not speak to the media. So Rob was supposed to speak on draft night, and because the trade was not official, he did not speak. Then he was supposed to speak the next day to beat reporters, and that got pushed back, and then he did not speak today. So we have not heard from him. I don't know if every executive has spoken. I know a lot of executives have spoken post-draft. So that is, I don't know the next time he'll speak. I assume it's going to be post-free agency. So we won't get some update. I mean, I don't think he was going to give us insight into like, are the Lakers operating above the cap or under the cap? And he's already given some perspective and quotes in the press release on drafting Cameron Carr. But it would have been nice to be able to ask a little bit about where the group's at with LeBron and where they're at with free agency. And I don't know what answers we would have gotten, but that clearly was not in the cards today. And that was pretty much it. I mean, it was a quick press conference, probably, I would guess, 10, 12 questions or so. And most of the stuff was straightforward. And, I took a bunch of notes, but I pretty much hit on everything. So I think it's now time to get into the free agent bargains. Again, the Lakers need to nail the back end of the roster, and we can focus on the cap space route or the over the cap route. And either way, they're going to need to find some minimum level guys or some guys making in the single digit millions that fit with what they're trying to do. So in terms of what I think the Lakers should be looking for in bargain free agents or guys that to me are making under $10 million, all these guys I think are projected to make under $10 million. There's maybe a guy or two you could argue that are going to make over it. I think there's a couple guys that are borderline there, so we could debate that. But I think these are guys that theoretically should be in the single digits, maybe close to 9 or 10 in a couple cases. But outside of that, most of these guys I think will be minimum guys or somewhere in between minimum and like half of the non-taxpayer MLE. I'm also looking at guys that I think are projected to be available, largely unrestricted free agents, in a couple cases team options that are projected to be declined, though technically might not be declined. But most restricted free agents are not going to be available for cheap. That's just the name of the restricted free agency game. It's usually the more expensive guys that you could potentially pry, not the cheaper guys. And then some of the cheaper team options, like you look at, there's several guys where it's like Dennis Jenkins or guys like that. If they're getting declined, it's to decline and extend or re-sign. It's not to decline and hit unrestricted free agency. So I'm trying to keep this realistic here in terms of, and Dennis Jenkins is also a guy that would not be making single digit millions. I think he'd be making a bit more. So it's got to be guys who are projected to make under 10 million a season and projected to actually be available. Then I think it's guys that need to address at least one and ideally multiple of LA's general roster needs in terms of defense, athleticism, motor, length, and shooting, including from the center spot. This is where I'm a little bit more open to the stretch five idea. I think based on the Lakers' needs for a rim runner, a rebounder, and a rim protector, it's hard to check all those boxes and be a stretch five and not be an all-star or a max guy. So I'm prioritizing those skill sets from the starting center and then looking at, can you find a bench big who can give you that 5-out look, but it might not be, it's not going to be a starting look. It's probably not going to be a closing look, but it still gives you that look. And basically like a better version of what Maxi Kleber gave the Lakers or like was supposed to give the Lakers. Can you find that from a second or third center? Then ideally players with the upside to outperform their contract. So I think several of these guys, depending on the contract, could end up being real bargains and values, or even in a minimum context, some of these veterans, I think, depending on if they get squeezed, could be valuable pieces. Then players who complement the players projected to be on the roster. So right now, Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, I think the Lakers are going to re-sign Jackson Hayes. So if it's a big man, someone who can contrast Jackson Hayes a bit. And then the rest of the group, I'm not sure, right? Like Vanderbilt, Laravia, Connect are currently on the roster, but I think any of those guys could be traded in a potential salary cutting move. So, and I don't think the Lakers are going to be building the roster around those three guys or their skill sets. Then potentially guys who could function as cheap replacements or cheaper replacements to some more expensive free agents. So looking at a Rui or a Marcus or a Luke, is there a guy that does what that guy does at 70% of the level, 80% of the level, but is going to maybe be like a minimum guy, and you can still have that skill set, albeit at a lower level, but for a much cheaper price. And you're paying that guy $2.5 million or $3 million versus, all three of these guys could theoretically be double-digit million guys. I think Luke is more borderline and probably right under that. And then ideally the player is under 30 years old, though there are some exceptions based on their specific skill sets. So once I pull up the targets here, I have certain guys starred for my favorite targets, and then I have certain guys starred for being 30 years old or older. So let's just get into the targets. General breakdown here between bigs, wings, and guards. Some of these guards you could argue, like Shamit or Keon Ellis, are arguably small wings, but you could also classify them as guards. Bruce Brown, similarly, like he plays this like he's almost a forward sometimes defensively for them, but like the backup point guard offensively. Josh Minot, you could classify as a big, or you could classify as a big wing. So I'm classifying these in general positional archetypes, but obviously several of these guys can play multiple positions, and like Spencer Jones could technically be a 4.5 or something if you really wanted to go a bit smaller. So tried to keep it in like the general buckets, but here's my list. So start with the bigs. I think Mamu is one of the guys to me that is borderline here. I could see Mamu having a market closer to the $10 million range, depending on the team and the situation. I think he's one of the best backup bigs in the league. And it was floated recently that he could be the Lakers' answer at center, which I vehemently disagree with, but he could be the answer in the form of a three-man committee. So if the Lakers are going with the committee approach, I think Mamu is an interesting option where, to me, he's a better player overall than Jackson. And if you have a situation where you have a big on, if you have the Robert Williams or Mitchell Robinson making 12 to 14, you have Jackson making 5 or 6, and then you have Mamu making 8 to 10, you are patching the center position together with a variety of skill sets there. So you have the lob threat, rebounding, rim protecting starter, albeit an injury-prone player who is more of a backup. You have Jackson as that high-level athlete, rim runner with the proof of concept with Luka and like just the great chemistry. And then you have Mamu as this skilled stretch big who could also function as a passing hub with the second unit, depending on the configuration. So I really like him. Now he's got a player option, but I think it's like under $3 million. So I'd be pretty surprised if he does not opt out and get a raise off that. Would not be surprised if he stays in Toronto, right? Like they could really use him, but he's someone to me, like the clear downsides with him are he's not the best rebounder and he's not a good rim protector or just overall defensive player. Like some of his defensive metrics are actually positive, but I think if you watch film on him, he's got some mobility there and he's got the strength, but he's not a classic rim protector or defensive anchor. So there's a real limitation there that I think in the context of the Lakers roster would be a limiting factor in terms of, I don't think he's a guy you'd ideally want to start even in a pinch or a guy you necessarily want to close with unless it's a particular matchup. But he is someone that I really like, and depending on the price and depending on the context of the Lakers center build, I would be interested in. Then we get to Marvin Bagley III, who this is one of the guys who's going to break my, like, don't necessarily be that second, third, fourth, fifth chance on a former lottery guy. But I think Marvin Bagley had a hell of a season for the Mavericks this past season. And, the last couple of years has really leveled up quietly. And to me, the offensive versatility that he has as a guy who now can pretty consistently hit threes. I think he shot like 46% on threes, relatively low volume, but an efficient three-point shooter, but also a guy who can pump fake and drive to the rim. He's got the athleticism to navigate the paint and like Euro step or just get pass guys. He has a really nice floater game. He's a lob threat. He can catch the ball in a mismatch and go up for a hook or get a putback and put back dunk, put back layup, draw fouls. Like I think he's got the offensive game to warrant this, and he's someone that might be. I mean, I think he should be above a minimum contract, but just based on the market, he might be a minimum contract. I think he should be somewhere in that $6 to $8 million range, probably, just looking at the reality of the market and how, if like Jordan Goodwin's getting 6 and just some of the way the contracts have played out for the guys under 15 million, it does feel like a lot of these guys are going to get squeezed. So maybe he ends up being a minimum or like a slightly above the minimum, but I really like him. Drawbacks with him, he's a solid rebounder, but he's not a great rebounder. And while he's a solid shot blocker as well, some of the rim protection stuff and just overall defensive awareness and effectiveness isn't quite where you want it. But again, I think he would hold up better in certain matchups than Jackson Hayes would. He's stronger than Jackson, and he's a much more skilled offensive player than Jackson with the 3-point range. I think he's improved as a passer, the ball handling, and I think he could score at all 3 levels. So he, to me, is more of an, like these first 2 are more offensive minded, but if it's in a 3-man committee, I'm okay with like assuming Jackson's one of the guys, and then you go more defensive with the center or the starter. That's where Mamu and Bagley, I'm a little bit more open to prioritizing the stretch big, the more skilled big on a certain contract in a certain construct. But Bagley, I think, is a guy who's being slept on by a lot of people who I would really like in a 3 big build. Then we get to Kenrich Williams, which this one I should have here that it's he's got the team option with OKC, but it's widely assumed that they're going to decline that because of the second apron constraints. So if he's someone that, like, if he hits the open market, I would really be interested in him as a small ball big. And we saw that at times for them against both the Lakers and the Spurs. Like, he was more on the fringes of the rotation just because of how deep OKC is, but he's a switchable defender. I think he guards up fairly well, and he's also a solid 3-point shooter. So he, to me, different type of big than basically everyone else on this list, but he does, to me, check the box of, if you want that small ball look, if you want to have a switchable front line, he's someone that could slide in there. And that's more of a specific big, so I don't even know if I'd consider him as part of like a 3-man center committee. I'd almost view him as somewhere between a 4 and a 5. And like, you could go with 3 bigs and then have him as just like the 4th big, but who can also play the 4 depending on the lineup. But so the guys with the yellow stars, to be clear, are my favorite targets or guys I would really prioritize depending on the price. The guys with the red stars are 30 plus years old, or some of these guys are 29 but going to be 30 going into the season or during the season. So Kenrich is an older guy. He's 31 years old, and so that would be the one concern here. But if he were willing to accept a minimum, I would sign him in a heartbeat, and I think he'd be a nice small ball option. Then we get to Brook Lopez, who might not be available. He's got about a $9 million team option with the Clippers, but they might be operating as a team with cap space. And if so, I think Lopez still is a solid 3-point shooter, and his defensive metrics continue to be elite. If you look at his defensive estimated plus minus and just on-off stuff, like, he's still one of the best rim protectors and shot blockers in the league. And so he would provide a unique skill set, assuming that he's a minimum guy. I think that would be where I'm comfortable with him. If he was accepting of a minimum contract and a committee approach, him as this unique floor spacer who also is an elite rim protector would be an interesting look off the bench. Now, the downsides are he's 38 years old. He's not the same player he was even a couple of years ago, to say nothing of, I think there was a bit of a drop off from this past season to the prior season. There will probably be a drop off from this past season to this next season. So he is aging. He's approaching that 40 mark, but due to his skill and his size and his IQ and he still continues to be an effective player who was starting games for the Clippers, right? And playing a certain role for them. I don't think the Lakers would want that, but if that gets declined and he's willing to accept a minimum role or a committee role, I would be interested in Brook Lopez potentially. Then we get to Andre Drummond, obviously one of the best rebounders, one of the best modern rebounders of all time. Just still putting up, like, he just grabs 8 rebounds in like less than 20 minutes every single game. It's crazy. Has also started to develop a bit of a 3-point shot. I think my downside with Drummond is just he's still pretty limited offensively outside of those catch and shoot situations and putbacks and whatnot, and the occasional post up maybe, but also a bit limited defensively. It's never been a strength of his, but I think I think he's 33 now. Like, as he's aged a bit, 32, 33, he's not a plus defender or close to like an average-ish defender. So that would be like, if I'm looking at the guys above him, I think they are all. I mean, there's a reason why he's ranked where he's ranked, but like Lopez is a much better defender. I think Williams is a better defender in the context of a small ball look, and Bagley and Mamu are just at he's much better rebounder than those guys, but they're much more skilled offensively. And while he's now developing that stretch, like, I think both those guys are just better shooters and more reliable shooters. So I'm probably lower on Drummond than consensus. Then Jock Landale, I think, is another sleeper who could be a minimum level guy or maybe slightly above that I would potentially like in a 3-man committee. I think looking at what he did with Memphis and Atlanta, just spacing the floor at times, blocking shots and stuff, though I would say overall probably a slight negative defensively. In a backup big context, obviously in a starter context, I think he's a bigger negative, but I just think he's a tough player who is competitive, has a certain motor, and is really skilled offensively. This would be another situation where you're looking at a stretch big with a certain amount of pick and pop ability, passing ability, and plays with a certain motor. So he's a little bit lower on the list than some of the other guys, but I think he's interesting. And he's also another guy, I think, in that like 31, 32 range. Musa Cisse, who is a restricted free agent with Dallas. I mean, you could argue from a fit perspective, he could be as high as 3 on this list, right behind Bagley. And maybe even, you could argue maybe Bagley, because of the lob threat ability and the finishing ability inside, is even ahead of Mamu, even if I think Mamu is an overall better player. And Cisse could be right behind him because he checks a lot of the boxes that you would want from a dice roll here, where he's 23. His finishing numbers aren't great, but I think he is one of these guys who can be a lob threat. Like in Dallas, they were playing without a point guard for basically the entire season, or a traditional point guard. So give him the playmaking of Luka and Austin and LeBron, and this guy is going to be eating with wide open lobs and putbacks. And I think just offensively, he's got the motor, he's got the athleticism. A little bit undersized. I think around 6'10", but sometimes depending on the matchup looks a little smaller. But he's got the athleticism and the motor. He's also, like, his rebounding numbers and his shot blocking numbers are off the charts. Both are elite. And I think there's something there that if he can be developed the right way and is in a situation where he's being spoon fed offensively, I think he could be a really effective bench player. And then, Precious Achua, just felt like I had to mention him with the season that he just had. Not like, definitely for me would be behind all of these guys on this list, and is more of just an energy motor big with some switchability and versatility, but did average basically 10 and almost 7 this past season. So there's something there where if we're judging this, all these guys compared to Maxi Kleba, for example, just because he was functionally the Lakers' third big man this season, like, I think all of these guys are notable upgrades over him. So as long as the Lakers come out of, and look, maybe Mamu is off the table, maybe Lopez or Williams don't even become available and their teams keep them, maybe Bagley gets a bag at a number that the Lakers aren't comfortable with, and like so on and so forth. You go down this list and maybe you get toward the bottom, but like I think getting one of these guys to me as a third or even potentially fourth big would make a ton of sense. I think most of these guys are minimum guys. I think the top 3 are the only guys I'd probably go slightly above the minimum. I mean, Mamu I'd go over for sure. It just depends on how much, like, the concept of spending a lot on a third big is a little tricky, right? So you'd probably need a discount on Mamu, but with the other guy, like, Bagley, I'd go a little over the minimum. Kenrich, I think I'd go a little bit over the minimum. Maybe Lopez, depending on, again, the context of everything. But I think most of these guys are minimum guys. And if you get them on minimums, like, I think that's a solid value. In terms of wings, and again, loose definition here, top target by far is Josh Minot, who's 23 years old. I think has shown a ton of potential as this Swiss Army knife who could do a little bit of everything, can play above the rim, has developed into a solid 3-point shooter, has some off the dribble game and bounce, and then defensively is a versatile defender. So he's a guy that I think, like, the analytics guys love him, and I'm sure there's a bunch of smart front offices that are going to be targeting him, and saw the breakout later in the season with Brooklyn where he started to actualize his potential more consistently. And there will be teams targeting him. So he's a guy that you might look at his numbers and just be like, oh, it's a minimum guy. But I think there will be some teams that target him above the minimum. But among these guys, I think he's got easily the highest potential. And like he might be the one guy here who has legitimate starter potential in the future. I don't think he's there right now, but I think he could be he could be a top 7 or 8 guy from the jump, and then develop into that at some point here over the next couple of years. So I'm pretty high on him, and I think the more film I've watched on him, the more I've looked at his numbers and just dove into him as a player. Like I am really high on him and his potential fit, and also I think he's in a sweet spot where he could be a minimum player or could be like a little bit above that. And if you can get him for that, I think that's a steal. And like right now, I think of all these guys, him at the minimum or close to it would be my favorite value by far, especially factoring in the age. At 23, I think I'm pretty sure he's the youngest guy on this list. I think he's tied with Cisse for being the youngest player. So that's another element here of he's a guy who I think could help you right now and also grow and continue to develop and grow into being a better player. So really high on Josh Minot. Then Matisse Thybulle, one of the best defenders in the NBA, one of the best thieves in the NBA, right? He's a thief. And I think that the big thing with him is obviously just the offense. But to me, with the way that his shot has developed, like still relatively low volume and still a guy that teams are going to play off of and not really respect. And so like he is a net negative offensively, even with his shooting improving. He's not a guy who's a threat to put the ball on the ground. He's not a good passer. He's not a good offensive rebounder. So there are some real offensive limitations with him, but he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. And based on his health track record, which has been checkered, he's a guy that I think you could get a decent discount on. So I don't know. I think he's going to get more than the minimum, but when I've done my mock cap sheets, I've had him at somewhere between like 6 to 8 million, 6 to 7 million. So I could see him in that range. And, looking at especially what like Jordan Goodwin just got, I think he could be in that ballpark as well. So yeah, I think he would be someone that, especially if you move off of Vando, he could spiritually play the Vando role of the defensive stopper off the bench, but he's a better shooter and offensive threat than Vando. And I think he's a better defender than Vando at this stage of their respective careers. So I think he's someone that would be a nice fit off the bench in a certain context, especially when a lot of the cap sheets that we go through, it's like the Lakers spend X amount of money on either the restricted free agent and just don't have that much money left over, or they go over the cap and then they spend part of the non-taxpayer MLE on Marcus or something. It's like Thibault to me is a guy that you could use the room exception on, or part of it. You could use part of the non-taxpayer MLE on, or you could use if you have like limited cap space remaining, you could probably slot him in there as well. So I think he's someone that there are like multiple ways the Lakers could find a way to slide him into their cap situation. Then Dean Wade, someone who is, you just look at his on-off splits throughout his career, he's been an on-off monster, and just Cleveland's been better with him on the floor. I think he's a solid defender, especially in more of a bench context. He's a clear plus defender and has some level of versatility. And if you look at actually his numbers in the playoffs, the job that he did against some of the top scorer, I mean, he was on Brunson and he did statistically a good job against him. But everyone that they were matched up with, Cade Cunningham, he held those guys under their playoff typical numbers, and just did the best job of anyone on Cleveland. So he, to me, is the limitation with him is the offensive side, where even though he's like an average to slightly above average shooter, he's a pretty low volume guy. He's low usage guy, and he's a borderline offensive liability, if just not an outright offensive liability. So he's someone that, again, maybe some smart teams like analytics, the analytics guys love him. And so like Minot, he could be a sleeper for several teams where he gets, someone pays him 9 million, 10 million, 11 million. Like he deserves that. I'm not denying that, but he to me is another borderline guy where it just depends on the market, depends how things play out. But I would be interested in him probably in more of a backup. I view him more as a 4 than anything. And that's where, again, with modern day 4s, they're kind of in between bigs and wings. It really depends on the player. Like I think John Collins is more of a big, but then a guy like Dean Wade, you could argue is more of a wing because he's guarding down and he's guarding the Brunsons and the Cades and some of the primary guys. So I like Dean Wade. I think that if the Lakers can't get a guy like a Thibault who is a more elevated specialist than Wade could be someone who, is Thibault probably doesn't have as much of a market as Wade, but I think Thibault, for what the Lakers specifically need, checks more of that box. Then one of my favorite guys, who I feel like has not been talked about that much, is Spencer Jones. And he's the rare restricted free agent that I think might be actually gettable because of Denver's cap situation. And if you pay him a certain amount of money, I think you could pry him from Denver. And again, we're still talking single digit millions here, but Spencer Jones to me, I mean, I don't know if it's just the games he played against the Lakers, though I did see some other performances from him that I thought really stood out. But like, he to me is he got a couple game winners hit on him from Luka and Shea, and he had the LinkedIn posts and stuff about it. But I think he's a versatile, multi-positional defender. He's a good shooter. He plays hard. Doesn't have much else to his game offensively outside of the shooting, and is not the level of rebounder you want for a guy his size. But in terms of checking the 3-and-D specific box, I think he's pretty close there as an above average shooter. Shot really well in the playoffs as well, and the small sample size of their series against Minnesota. But to me, he's more of a big wing defender than a guard defender. So there's maybe some overlap with, like, Luka tends to guard those guys. LeBron, like he's more of a 4, I guess, defensively, where maybe he could guard some threes. I actually thought in one of the games against the Lakers, he defended Luka, like that game in Denver. I thought he defended Luka like as reasonably well as a player, like a bench player can. Like by bench player standards, I was like, okay, like that was a decent job against Luka. So he's something that I think is interesting, that with Denver's money crunch, everyone's talking about Peyton Watson, what they're going to do with Christian Brown and Cam Johnson. Spencer Jones is the one to me that, like, they're going to have to figure that out. But Spencer Jones is an obvious casualty to me that, depending on the price, I would be interested in, and I think would be likely an upgrade over, like, say, Jake LaRavia. Then we get into Gary Payton II. You could argue he's a guard, but I think he functions more. He's similar to Vando in that he functions up a position or two because like he's almost like a small big in a way. So you're kind of splitting the difference here between him being a big offensively and a guard defensively, but he can guard multiple positions. He still is one of the best bench defenders in the league. And I think his ability to operate out of the short roll, the cutting, the playmaking, the shooting's the obvious limitation here. And that's the reason why he's a bench player. That's the reason why he is not going to be making as much money as maybe he should based on the intangibles, the defense, et cetera. He's also 32, 33 now. But I really like Gary Payton. I've been a fan of Gary Payton for a long time. And I think it does feel like he's one of those guys that might just retire in Golden State and like they'll just keep him around indefinitely. And they regretted letting him go to Portland. And so part of me is like, I don't even know how available he is. He might just be re-signing in Golden State year after year. But if he is potentially available, he's a guy that I would be interested in a bench role. Gary Trent Jr. has a player option that it's pretty low. I could see him reject. I think it's around 3 million, 3.5 million, something like that. He's someone that I would be interested in as well. My issue, I guess Gary Trent could be a potential Luke replacement. I had Tim Hardaway Jr. on this list, but the more I thought about it, I was like, this dude was just third in Sixth Man of the Year voting. I don't see him necessarily getting single digit millions. Maybe he does because of the market and because of his defensive limitations, but it feels like Tim Hardaway Jr. is a guy who should be in that $10 million range, if not slightly more, just based on the shooting alone. And that was also something that Denver's going to have to figure out. But Gary Trent Jr., I looked at as a potential cheaper Luke alternative, where I would say more of like a scorer than just like a pure bucket getter than Luke, not the same level of shooter as Luke, but is someone that I think could be a cheaper alternative depending on what happens with Luke, and is better defensively than Luke, still not a plus defender and not a plus rebounder. So he does he's primarily out there for his offense and his shooting. But I think based on the Lakers' constraints with some of their own free agents, if they are looking to upgrade the roster and spend money elsewhere, I think Gary Trent is an interesting potential Luke replacement. Then Javonte Green is a guy. It's crazy how old he is. He's 33 or about to be 33, and you just don't. He feels like he's younger because he hasn't been in the league, for that long. But he to me is another one who checks the box of 3-and-D wing plus 3-point shooter, and another solid defender, multi-positional guy who I think just has gotten it out the mud. And I like just how I like everything about his game. Like I just like how he plays. I like his mentality. There's a certain amount of athleticism there, and he's obviously fit, solidly in Detroit. So again, we're talking about like back end guys, minimum guys. I think he's a guy in that conversation. And then Ochai Agbaji, a guy who's fallen from grace, a guy who at one point was being, the asking price was a first round pick for him. I don't think he's viewed the same way anymore, but him being an RFA, depending on the contract, I think could be gettable. And I like the athleticism. I like the slashing. I like the defense. The shot has not come along, and overall he is limited offensively. And he's also not, despite the athleticism, is maybe not like the rebounder or defensive playmaker to the level that you would want. Definitely not from like a steals and deflections perspective. He does have some solid block numbers, but he's a guy that I would potentially take a gamble on. And really, I mean, if he could shoot, he might be in like the Wade Jones territory, maybe even a little bit higher. Like he might end up being behind like Minot if he could shoot, but that's a big, he cannot. So that's a big deficiency in his game. And looking at the guards, Landry Shamet is another one who to me is borderline coming off of the playoff run that he just had. I think he's someone that might just get squeezed by the market because there are other perimeter guys like a Quentin Grimes or Kelly Oubre, or even potentially a Marcus Smart or Luke Kennard, depending on if they test the market or how the Lakers approach their free agency, that could get more money theoretically. Like I would rather just straight up have Landry than Luke. I think we saw in the playoffs how Landry's game scaled And there was several big games. I mean, I think about game 1 against Cleveland and that comeback that they had, but even in the finals, like there was so many big moments where Landry Shamet was out there and hit big shots. And I think whereas like Luke had the hot start in the playoffs and progressively was played into a smaller role in both series and was picked on progressively defensively, and just I think we saw some of the limitations with Luke at the highest level. Landry Shamet, I thought, rose to the occasion and just hit big shot after big shot. There was times they were using him as a point of attack defender and he was holding up fine. Like that's been one of the biggest developments in his game. I covered him as a rookie and early in his career, and he was not known as a defender. He was a defensive minus, and to see how much he's progressed on that end, like he's also one of the better high volume shooters in the league. So I think he gives you, he's not like a shutdown defender, but I think he's at least average-ish, if not above average, depending on the matchup, depending on the context. And that to me, like I would rather take the downgrade in shooting from Luke to Shamet, which I think is not that much of a downgrade, but is a downgrade with like the motor, the defense. I just think he's at the physicality is a little bit bigger and stronger than Luke. I just think that's at a different level that I would prioritize that. Now, again, he might be like, maybe some team throws 3 years, $36 million. We often see guys get the bag after winning a championship. And so this could be a little too pessimistic on Landry's market. And he's the guy who I was the most borderline with in terms of including here. But if he is available, and if even potentially in that $8 to $10 million range, like if that's the same range for Luke, I would just straight up prefer Landry Shamet. So I think there's a chance he gets over 10. I think there's also a chance he potentially gets squeezed by the market a little bit. It's more like 8, 9. Definitely a borderline guy in terms of double-digit millions. And if he is under that or even around it, I'm interested in him and would view him as an upgrade over Luke. Then Keon Ellis, X's favorite bench wing, 3D wing. I've soured on him a bit. I no longer view him as the same player, and just seeing him get an opportunity in Cleveland and not really deliver to the degree that you would have wanted. Like I feel like he's a player who exists more in theory than in reality, but he's got elite finishing numbers. He's got some elite defensive numbers. He's a solid shooter, and he's in that 6'4", 6'5" range. So. Not quite the defender you want him to be, not quite the offensive player you want him to be, but if he is a minimum guy or if he's close to a minimum guy, I would still be interested in taking a swing on him. But I think there was a report not too long ago that he might be getting double-digit millions. If that's the case, I'm out at that price point. But if he's a minimum guy, if he's like a $6 million guy, I'd be interested. Maybe anything above that, I'm probably out on him. Like I don't think he should be making more than Jordan Goodwin, despite in theory his skill set should be better, or he should be a better player, more effective player than Jordan Goodwin. I don't think that's the case. So if Jordan Goodwin kind of set the market for two-way guards, and if that's the price point for him, I think Ellis should be in a similar range, if not even potentially a little bit lower. DeAnthony Melton is another one where he has a player option. I think he's going to decline it, and he's dealt with injuries over the last few years. This past year was put in a role where I think he was asked to do a little bit too much offensively, and it really affected his efficiency. He had a really down year from 3, shot 29%. But if you look at his career, I think he's going to bounce back. He's a clear bounce back candidate, in my opinion. And the reason I don't have many guards on here is because I think already looking at the Lakers roster, like I just don't think they need many guards. And especially in free agency, like I would maybe be okay with trading for certain players, but I don't think the Lakers need like a Tyus Jones or a Ryan Nembhard or like a Brandon Williams or something like that. Like I don't think they need these like 6'1", 6'2" table setting point guards. I think they need defense and size and athleticism. So everyone on this list is, with the exception of I guess Gary Trent, like 6'4" and above basically, and not Gary Trent, Gary Payton brings a certain amount of defense. Like, there's a couple defensive liabilities among the bigs, but I wanted guys who play defense at a certain level and then ideally can shoot. And so I'm trying to identify those types of guys on cheaper contracts. But D'Anthony Melton, I think, the upside with him, he could be a potential Marcus replacement, depending on I guess a Marcus replacement if Marcus is shifted to a bench role. Let me be clear there. I don't think he could step in and start the way that Marcus did and play that Marcus role of just guarding the best perimeter scorer. But if the Lakers reshape the roster and end up getting that two-way wing, end up getting the younger, bigger, more athletic, longer-term wing, and try to shift Marcus to a bench role, if Marcus is making 10 to 12 million and the Lakers just can't afford him, if D'Anthony Melton is making half of that, I think he could be a potential replacement. Now, to be clear, I think the Lakers should prioritize keeping Marcus. You guys who listen to the show know how I feel about Marcus. I think it goes beyond just on the court, off the court. He was a defensive leader, plus minus monster, on off monster. So I'm not advocating necessarily for D'Anthony Melton replacing him. I'm just stating that the Lakers are going to have to make some tough decisions. And if it comes to the point where Marcus has a market that is dictating he's worth X and the Lakers can only afford Y, if they are in a situation where they just have to lose him, D'Anthony Melton would be the type of guy I'd want to go after. Although I think Marcus is a better player. And I also think Marcus's intangibles, like just the leadership, the effect that he had on the group is at a different level. And then final one, Bruce Brown Jr., who's someone that has tortured the Lakers in the past, someone that the Lakers have been interested in the past, and someone that I think in a certain context could make some kind of, I guess, similar to the Marcus replacement in a bench role, not in a starting role. That could be an option, but unique player with his skill set of being this backup point guard type who could run the offense, help you get out in transition, but then also defend up a bit. So this is overall, I would say, an underwhelming list. This is not a great free agent class. And there were some names on here that were even more depressing that I had to cut off because I was just I'm not going to advocate for this level of guy. Then we can get to the bottom where I just want to state my opinion on these five guys. There's more guys. If a guy's not on here, I'm either not interested, or I don't think they're going to be available, or I don't think they're going to be available for under $10 million. So if whatever names you're seeing that you think should be on here, I think they probably fit one of those three boxes. Not interested for me. Vucevic and Nurkic, I just don't think they're good enough defensively. Vucevic offensively, yes, but I also think sometimes there's guys where because of their stature, if you sign them, they're probably going to have a certain role. So sure, if Vucevic was willing to play a situational backup role, maybe I would slot him somewhere on this list. But I just feel like we saw how the Boston situation got played out. He got benched in the playoffs, and just I think he's one of the worst rim protectors in the league, and I don't think he's good enough offensively to offset that. So, and I also don't even know if he'd be a minimum big. I think based on his numbers, he's probably going to be above the minimum. So I think based on his likely contract and his defensive limitations, I just don't, and the likely role he would have, that's just a concoction I want to avoid. Similar thing with Jusuf Nurkic. Now, Nurkic, the passing, the rebounding, I think he's a better, or at least statistically a better defender than Vucevic. I think they both are pretty flawed and have their foot speed limitations and rim protection limitations. Between the two, I might prefer Nurkic. He also has a physical element that I think he leverages his physicality defensively a little bit better than Vucevic, but both guys are kind of the same general thing of very limited defensively to the point of I just don't think that they're playable at the highest levels. And look, there's a couple of guys on this big list. If you look at, I think Drummond, Landale, Achua's an undersized big. The bigs I have are flawed to some degree as well. But I think Vucevic and Nurkic would come in and expect to either be starting or vying for the primary backup role with Jackson. And I just think that would be a mistake. Of note, though, Vucevic does share an agent with Luka, so maybe he's an option. The Lakers were reportedly interested in him around the trade deadline. Gabe Vincent, that one is self-explanatory. Kevin Love, growing up was one of my favorite players. First ballot Hall of Famer coming off of the championship and playing in the Olympics, but not someone that I just think is like his actually. In some ways, he's got like better defensively in like some regards. I feel like throughout his career, at least like the post defense and stuff. But he's basically a power forward playing stretch five, and I think there's like good shooter, good rebounder, but I would rather go with one of these bigger guys who are all in that 6'11", 7 foot range for the most part. And then Jordan Clarkson had a couple nice moments in the finals, but I don't think he's a rotation player anymore on a good team. So with all that said, let's get into the Q&A here. Main Squeeze said, or do not see a question, but I appreciate the super chat. Next one from Federico Perez. Thank you for the super chat. Give a roll to the young core to see what we got. Certainly, I think the Lakers need to fill out the roster, right? And they're going to probably have somewhere between 2 to 4 minimum players on the team, depending on how things shake out. But I would agree that there are certain like young guys that deserve an opportunity. I think specifically Adu and Cameron Carr, but I think the Lakers are going to have a bit of a shakeup here. And if it does, especially if they go under the cap and they use their cap space, you could be in a situation where you add Walker Kessler and you keep LeBron, or you add Walker Kessler and you keep Rui. You add Walker Kessler, you sign Kelly Oubre, or you add Peyton Watson and you sign Robert Williams or Mitchell Robinson, something like that. All of a sudden your cap space is gone. And then you're going to have the room exception, which you'll probably use on Marcus. And then that's it. And you're going to have an incomplete roster, probably depending on if you make any other cost-cutting moves or what happens with DA. You might have like 11, 12 guys. You're going to need another 2 to 3 guys for the minimum. So that's more so where this conversation was grounded in terms of like Minot, I think would be a really interesting fit because he's 23 years old and would fit a longer-term timeline. Most of these other guys are veterans, but I also think most of these other guys are better than most of the Lakers' current young core. I think the Lakers' current young core is pretty limited. There's a reason why those guys don't have a lot of trade value. And so I think the Lakers need to hit on some bargains who, for the most part, I don't think check their typical, let's find a former lottery pick or hyped pedigree guy that we want to give. Like, again, Bagley's one of those guys. Pretty sure he's the only one on that list to my, like, I guess Lopez, but Lopez is so deep into his career at this point that I don't really consider him in that group anymore. I think he's elevated to an elder statesman, and Drummond maybe a little bit. He's obviously a former Laker as well, but for the most part, most of these guys are 30 or under, and for the perimeter guys, they're all at least average, if not above, defenders with a couple of exceptions. Cammy, thank you for the super chat. What you said on Jim Rome, the ideal pathway is Luka turning a C center to a B. I'm sorry, but Rob has 0 excuses. We are cooked if this is the plan. I did see that clip, and with respect to Dan, who is my guy, I could not agree more. I think in the worst case scenario, it needs to be turning a B center into an A center, but I don't think the Lakers can walk out of this summer with a C center, because we talked about it today on Lakers Collective, and I'm sure most of you tuned into that. If not, obviously check that out after this episode. But we talked it through, and it was like the Lakers they've ran it back multiple summers. I've been on this repeatedly that the last time they did an offseason trade was August 2022 for Pat Beverly, like a non-draft pick related, like an actual player trade was August 22, Patrick Beverly. We're going on nearly 4 years since they've done that. And if they don't make a trade this offseason, it would be 4 consecutive off seasons not making a trade, which is entering like Chicago Bulls territory, where there's that stretch where they did not make a trade for like X amount of time. But like they continue to build these half-baked rosters that be like, let's fully bake it in the regular season. And then the group actually like comes together and gels at the right time. And then it's let's kick the can forward of, well, we need more time. We didn't really get to see what it looks like. And then you push it into the next year. That's not going to work this summer. That's just not going to work. That's not how this is. Like, if that's how this goes, then the Lakers are, I think they're going to be in a tough spot with Luka Doncic next summer, because if, again, I said it on Lakers Collective, like if you walk out of this summer with Mitchell Robinson or Robert Williams as your starting center, I think that's really disappointing. You are effectively choosing an injury-prone backup to be a starter, where, like, again, you did that last summer, or not necessarily injury-prone guys, although Marcus is injury-prone. DA had actually had some injuries as well, so like you could argue that, but like not as injury-prone necessarily as Mitchell Robinson and Robert Williams, but it was a placeholder situation. It was like, we're saving up our cap space for 2026. So we're going to sign these buyout guys. We're going to get this value. And then next summer, we're going to make the moves. They've promised Luka heaven and earth this summer. And if you deliver Mitchell Robinson or Robert Williams, that's not heaven and earth. That's not good enough. So the one way that's potentially good enough or acceptable is if you also deliver Peyton Watson and you're finding another, like a long-term wing. That's maybe the one way. But Luka clearly wants a center of a certain caliber. And if the Lakers are not delivering that and then also not delivering at a different position to offset that, you just haven't delivered. And at that point, like, you're going to have a frustrated superstar, and you're also just not going to be a good enough team. So there's a ton of pressure to nail this summer, and it's of their own doing. Like, they are the ones who have hyped up this summer behind the scenes and to some degree publicly. And if you hype up the summer and hype up this cap space, like, how many summers have we heard that they have X amount of picks and X amount of optionality, and then what do they do with that? They just roll it over. Well, this is the time to cash in. And so I think there would be a collective level of frustration, certainly from the fan base, but I would say even internally to some degree with them. If they walk out of here with a couple of role players, like I continue to say, if you use your cap space on Robert Williams and Kelly Oubre or something like that, that is just not anywhere close to good enough. And it would be a really disappointing summer if that's how this plays out. Drew Gallegos, thank you for the super chat. Hey, would you do Vando, DK, and Jake for Miles Turner straight up? Gets rid of 2 non-rotation players for us without affecting our cap space too much this season. I did have someone float some version of this to me over text as a hypothetical, and it's not my favorite. Those who watched the center episode last night know how, and just listen to this show or Lakers Collective know where I'm at with Miles Turner. I just think the Lakers have 3 macro boxes they need from a center: rim runner, lob threat, high-level rebounder, high-level rim protector. He only checks the high-level rim protector box. I think Luka and Austin could unlock a different version of Miles Turner. Like, I think he's got the length and athleticism to be a lob threat. That's just not really a strength of his. It's not how he's been deployed in the past. So maybe they get kind of similar to DA. They turn him into something. You know, with DA, it was something he was earlier in his career in Phoenix, but still didn't really want to play that role. Maybe they could do that with Turner as well. The rebounding, though, I don't think it's like, oh, Miles Turner, just try harder on the glass and you're going to be a better rebounder. Like, this has been a weakness of his continually. I think it's only worsened as he's aged. So you are going to need to bake that in, where you can partly offset that with Luka being such a good rebounder, but I think you need to add then another high-end rebounder into the starting group to partly offset Turner's limitation. So I think because of that, I'm like, all right, you get better defensively. He's a better defender than DeAndre Ayton, better rim protector. I think he's more versatile overall, more effective. That's an upgrade. He's a worse rebounder, and I think he's worse in the specific role of screen, roll, screen, dive, rim run, offensive rebounds, catch the ball in the post, like little hook shots and stuff that DA was so good at. That's just not Turner's game, and definitely not his game as he's aging. So, like, part of me views it as just like, I just don't think he's a good enough option where even if you do this trade, like, sure, in a vacuum, I would rather have Turner than Vando, DK, and Jake. I think that's a no-brainer. When you look at the contract in 3 years, 84, and how much money you're going to be paying him. Like I've talked about the New York build, and New York, all 5 starters making 20 plus million. 4 of their starters making 33 plus million. 3 of those guys are soon going to be making 40 plus with Cat, OG, and Brunson. So you can have that top heavy build. Like you need to nail the Robinsons, the McBrides, the Shamits, and the Alvarados, like those guys off the bench. But if you can have a top heavy build in terms of build an awesome 5-man group, all making 20 plus million, like the cap will continue to go up. You can't afford it. The issue is, like, if you are spending that money on a guy, like Turner is not, in my opinion, on that level of any of those Knicks guys. I would take any of those guys over him in a heartbeat, including Josh Hart, who makes less money than him. So I just think there's a limitation there where, like, the center position is so important in general. It's also so important on a Luka team. So to get a guy that, in my opinion, only checks one of the 3 most important boxes and is over 30 and has a terrible contract, like, that's just where I'm like, what's the upside here? Like, asset management to some degree with, like, the context of this cap sheet, but not future cap sheets. Like, Vando will eventually be off after the following season. DK is an impending free agent. Jake is an impending free agent. So you're screwing your future cap sheets for next year and the following year. You're adding, depending on, I think it's somewhere around 13, 14 million more than Vando the following season, and then the additional 28 the next season. So, like, there's a real opportunity cost in the future of, sure, in the present, you upgrade the roster, but I don't know that you upgrade it to the degree. Like, I just think about Miles Turner in the Knicks series or the Thunder and Spurs series, and I just don't think he could hang with those bigs personally. I also think if you go back a year, he did not play well in the Knicks series or the Thunder series in the conference finals and finals. There's a lot of times he wasn't closing games, or they looked better with Siakam or Toppin at the 5 going small. He didn't shoot well in either of those series, struggled on the glass. So I have some concerns about Turner at the highest levels. I get, like, the talent perspective, but I just don't think he checks enough boxes. He's the oldest option that's being talked about. Like, all the other guys we're talking about are under 30. And he's also has the worst contract of those guys easily. So I'm like, you get the upgrade, but you're locking yourself into Miles Turner. Like, I don't know, maybe you then turn around and still get the Robinson, or, like, I don't know, if you told me you got the Williams and made him the starter, like, that might, but then now you're wasting 40 million on the center spot, and the guy making more money as a backup. So that doesn't really make sense as I talk it out. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of out on Turner because I don't think, I think the guys who have been, if you look at some of the recent stretch bigs, I think they've been at a different level in terms of their defense or at least the rebounding. Like, Turner's a better defender than Cat, I think, overall, even though Cat had a strong postseason. Cat's a much better rebounder than him. You go back, you had the Chet Hartenstein combo. Chet is a better rebounder and a better defender than Turner. You go back the prior year, Porzingis and Horford, better defenders. Rebounds are similar. That was kind of a weakness at times with that Celtics team. Then you go previous year, Jokic had his best shooting season, obviously a much better rebounder than Turner. Turner's a better defender, but Jokic is a monster defensive rebounder. Previous year, you had Draymond and Looney and stuff. So then we had the Bucks with Lopez. And I just think it's been like guys who are either better defensively than Turner or guys who are better rebounders and or both. And Turner, to me, it's like, I just don't think he's good enough, basically. So if it all came down to it, and this is the best option, if it is like Turner versus maybe going the backup center route, I could understand the Turner argument. I just think, I guess, like, you'd have to almost guarantee to me that you're getting the Peyton Watson, or if it's just flip these guys into Turner and run it back with the rest of the group, I would think that would be disappointing and underwhelming. If you tell me you're gonna maybe keep LeBron and add Watson, or Watson and Rui or whatever, okay, I'm a little bit more interested. But I think the center spot is I just don't think it's a contract that's going to be tradable either. So once you trade for Turner, you're going to have to attach something in the future, I think, to get off of it. I don't think it's going to age well. So ultimately, like I would lean no, but I think if you've exhausted all other alternatives and this is potentially the best option in terms of getting an actual center upgrade, I would reluctantly do it. But I would really hope you nail some other positions and get some other real talent. And it's not a situation where you're just flipping these guys for Turner and calling it a day and being like, all right, let's run the rest of it back with bring back LeBron, Rui, Luke, and call it a day. Like, no, I think you still have to upgrade the roster. Toko, thank you for the super chat. LACB, Dayron, Minot. Okay, so CB. So, all right, so this is a trade, and you're saying Christian Brown, Dayron, and Minot. Denver, Jake LaRavia. Nets, Vando, DK, first via Denver and first via LA. Bet on it being a down year from CB and get 2 decent bench players. So let's walk through each part of this. So for the Lakers, you're giving up Jake LaRavia, Vando, Dalton, and a first. So the first is the cost of getting off of Jared Vanderbilt's contract. And you're also getting some interesting talent there with Dayron and Minot. I would love to be getting a pick for Christian Brown. I guess you could argue that you're getting that equivalent in Dayron and Minot, and you are flipping 3 rotation guys for 3 better rotation guys. Christian Brown is one that I'm a little bit higher on him bouncing back and being like, I view Christian Brown and Miles Turner as similar in terms of they're making around the same amount of money. Brown's making a little bit less. His contract's even longer, so there's potentially more risk. The difference for me is Christian Brown is 24 years old. Miles Turner's 30. So in theory, Christian Brown still has a few more years to hit his prime and a few more years to, or, should be bouncing back to who he was rather than hoping Turner, who's past 30, is going to do that. And Christian Brown had 3 good shooting seasons, or 3 above average and eventually good, 1 down year. So I think there's some untapped potential there. Now, he's another one though that like not my preferred choice to be the starter. I think you would have to exhaust all options, and then that could be, ideally he's a bench player, but then he's also making starter money. So that's where it's not a good contract. Like, it's just, I think he will bounce back, but he might not bounce back enough to warrant the contract, especially as it gets into the mid to high 20s. I do like Dayron. I do like Minot for Denver. So you're getting off of CB and you're attaching a first and you're getting back Jake. So you're saving a bunch of money, and the cost of doing business is the first. They're going to have to dump someone. So that, I guess, could work for them. And that's just the cost of doing business. And then for the Nets, you're getting 2 firsts for taking on Vando and DK, getting off of. Yeah, I could see that something like this being realistic. For the Lakers, you're taking on about, I'm trying to do the quick math here. You are taking on about, that's almost $30 million, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, $30 million across those 3 guys, and you're sending out about 20. So you are taking on about $8 million. For as much as I like Minot and I like Dayron, I don't love the idea of giving up a first and getting, like, I want something. So I would want something else from Denver. And I don't know if they'd want to give up, like, they're already giving up the first to Brooklyn. I would maybe push for like a second in this scenario to Brooklyn, or a swap. I think LA giving up a first. You're getting off Vando, so that's obviously, but you could also view it as more like Denver is facilitating the getting off Vando to a degree by sending the first to Brooklyn instead of sending the first to you for taking on Christian Brown. So it's kind of a musical chairs element here. I would take out the first from LA and do like a second and maybe a swap or something, because they are getting off Vando, but I think the Christian Brown contract has the potential to be even worse than Vando's contract in the context of, like, if he does not bounce back as a shooter or he cannot stay healthy, that's a pretty bad contract depending on how it ages and how he continues to develop. So I would say, like, Denver has to, I think, give up a first probably to get off of him, or something close to that. If I'm the Lakers, that I would fight to just have it be viewed as like Denver's giving up the first for Brooklyn taking on Vando, and you're giving up something less. Shibugan, thank you for the super chat. Is there any indication that JJ is going to play the young guys this season? Laravia getting minutes over literally anyone last season was perplexing. So one thing I would note is Jake Laravia is actually younger than you think. Jake Laravia is younger than Dalton Connect by almost 2 years. So Jake, I think people don't view him in that context, but he's 23 years old. Like he's as old as some of the rookies incoming in this draft class. That's not to defend Jake's playing time, but I'm just stating that, like, using him as the specific example, I think he does qualify as a younger player who was only in his, I believe fourth season, or was it his, I think it was his fourth. Yeah. But to this point, I think ideally the Lakers have some more competition in terms of like better young talent. Like Dalton Connect had his opportunity to start the season. Dalton Connect has not shot the ball well. I was actually just looking at this, and in second and third quarters, because Dalton shoots amazing in garbage time. You know, that's been my running joke since Dalton has been in the league, is like Dalton looks like Michael Jordan in garbage time. But the first 3.5 quarters, especially this season, Dalton has not been shooting well. And specifically in the second and third quarters, for the entire season, he shot 23% on threes in the second quarter and 20% in the third quarter. Like, he could not shoot in the middle of games. And so I don't think you could necessarily say Dalton should have been the guy playing more. Bronny was a slower build, and they wanted to see strides from him throughout the season, which he did show, and eventually he got that opportunity. I think they did botch the Nick Smith Jr. and Kobe Buffkin situations respectively, in terms of both guys had their flashes and then they would just go weeks and games without playing. And it was weird. Like, Kobe Buffkin had a couple flashes and then they just went away from him, and then they signed him to the contract and then he still didn't play. Drew Timme had some flashes in January. I've talked about, they had like the double big looks that worked, goes away from that. So I do think it is a thing. Like, people have compared JJ to Tibbs for a variety of reasons, and there is some the Thibodeauian tendencies from JJ in terms of overloading the starters, short bench, not trusting young guys. I think those are some areas he needs to improve on. I would push back though that he's not dealing with the most young talent in the world, and the Lakers, I think overall, have pretty underwhelming young talent relatively. Adu's the other one that I think that one was a little bit more medical based on some of his physical limitations, but there was also times when they could have played him and they just didn't. So I'm not going to absolve him of any blame or criticism for the Adu situation. I just think the Adu one was a little trickier based on the knee recovery and how careful they were being with him at times. He also had several setbacks during the regular season. So it wasn't like Adu did not play in summer league. He was not healthy to start the season, and then he was not healthy during a couple portions of the season. So Adu had an up and down year from just an availability standpoint, to say nothing of obviously how JJ used him. Then we did get the flashes late in the season, but it was a little too, it was too little too late. And I think it's something that the Lakers need to address moving forward, specifically JJ and the coaching staff. So I agree. I think the expectation should be Cameron Carr develops into being at least a back end rotation guy. Adu should be getting a lot more opportunity, and then we'll see which of the young guys are still on the roster. Like, I'm skeptical. I don't think Nick Smith Jr. is going to be back. I think they're going to try and get off Dalton, and then they have a decision to make here in the next few days on Bronny. So could be an entirely new cast of young guys. Maybe one of the two-way guys or Exhibit 10 guys pops and makes the roster. But I'm with you in general. I think JJ could do a better job of, I think, especially when they show, like, that's the thing. I think that my biggest criticism would more specifically be, like, I felt like there were times young guys started to show some progress, started to show that they were putting it together, and then they would be yanked from the rotation inexplicably. And that's more my issue of, again, I don't know that they necessarily had this like no-brainer young talent that had to play. I would say Adu is probably the closest. But when those guys would be getting into a certain rhythm, be getting into figuring out themselves at the NBA level, I think that's when you need to ride that and you need to push that to its limit and explore what these players can be. Whereas it felt like we would just get these flashes from these guys and then it would ultimately amount to nothing, and it would be 2 or 3 games and then the guy's pulled and that's it. Whereas I think that the best teams, the best organizations, especially when you are at a depth deficit, and the Lakers are in situations where they're relying on the Gabe Vincents and the Maxi Klebas and whatnot. It's like, see what you have on the bench and see if Nick Smith Jr. or Kobe Buffkin or Drew Timme or Bronny or Dalton or one of these guys can pop. And I do think some guys are given opportunities, with Dalton specifically being you're given an opportunity at the beginning of the season, did not really show much progress as a defender, as a processor. I thought actually regressed in several categories this past season. So that, I think, ship has sailed. But outside of him, there were moments where other guys got opportunities. I just think, with the exception of Bronny late, it wasn't consistent, and that's something that JJ needs to improve with. BT Kingsley 5225. I don't know why I said the numbers this time, but shout out to BT Kingsley, very active with the super chats, and I appreciate it. Kessler over Rudy. If we give him 40, do we regret it? I would say Kessler over Rudy in the sense of Kessler like just turned 25. I forget if he's 24, about to be 25, or just turned 25, somewhere in that range. Rudy's 34. He just turned 34 actually today. And so I think from that perspective, Kessler could be your starting center for the next 6 to 10 years, depending on how his career goes, depending on how his health goes. Rudy, as I think, has shown some signs of decline the last year or two overall on both ends, but more so more so on the offensive end. And I think there is a material difference between Kessler and Rudy. Kessler has started to develop a 3-point shot. He made 6 threes in his 5 games, very small sample size, but Rudy has not flashed that type of range. And I think he's got much better hands than Rudy. Like, I think Rudy's an underrated lob threat and can catch lobs at a certain level, but I think Kessler can do that as well. But what Kessler could do that Rudy can't is catch the ball in traffic and go up and score over guys, draw fouls. And I think Kessler's post game and just his overall touch around the basket is at a different level than Rudy's is, and just really the hands. That's been a limitation for Rudy. He has stone hands if it's not like a point blank wide open situation, and so Kessler doesn't have the defensive upside, I would argue, that Rudy has. Like, Rudy's an all-time great on the defensive end. He's one of the greatest defenders of all time, 4-time defensive player of the year, a force unto himself on the defensive side. I think putting Kessler in that class would be disingenuous. Like, he's not there. Maybe he gets there, but he's not there. Could he be 85% of that? Could he be 90% of that defensively? I think he's already shown the potential to be a top 5 rim protector, and it's about doing that, I think, in a winning situation now. Like, that's the next step for him, whether that's in Utah or LA or elsewhere. But I think he's similar level of rebounder, maybe not quite peak Gobert rebounder, but for most of Rudy's career, he's right there with him. And then the difference to me is just the offensive end, where Kessler has better touch. Kessler can catch better. Kessler can shoot. I think he's a better passer than Rudy. So I just trust the ball in Kessler's hands more than Rudy's. And I think that's a big difference between the two, to say nothing of the near 10-year age gap that there is. And also that I don't think Rudy's going to be available now. Like, there's a version of Minnesota moving on from some of their frontline guys where Rudy was available. I'd be pretty shocked if after you lose Naz Reid and Julius Randle, you also move off Rudy Gobert. So I don't even know if you were necessarily suggesting Rudy as an option, but I would much rather take the guy that's 10 years younger and projects to have I think already has a higher ceiling and is a better offensive player than Rudy ever was. But I think, has even more upside to be tapped into, especially playing off of Luka and Austin. So now the second part of this, 40 is a lot. I'm not going to lie. 40 is a lot for a center who, already the $28 million AAV that Utah offered is the most ever for a non-All-Star center. So if it anything above that, which it looks like it's going to go above that, whether it's Utah or LA, uncharted territory. You're paying a non-All-Star center, All-Star center level money. And if he is making 30 plus, he's going to be paid as a top 10 center in the league. So he does need to level up. It is a bet on his projection and his development and his continued ascension. But I mean, I would really hope it does not go to 40. I think, I guess I would really hope it doesn't go to 40. I think 40 is too high, but it also depends on the opportunity cost here. Like if the Lakers, if it's basically like get Kessler for 40, or you have the poo-poo platter that they're potentially staring down with either their cap space or going above the cap, I think you have to consider it. But I think my goal would be to be somewhere in the 35 range. I think that is still a bit of an overpay, but it's less of an overpay. And I could see Kessler growing into that. I could see him growing into 40, but you also have to remember, if it's 40 AAV, it's not technically 40. It's always like the first couple years are under, that middle year is around that. So it'd probably be something like 36, 38, 40, 42, 44. So it's not just 40 AAV. It would be 2 year, or depends if it's a 4 or 5 year deal. But if it's 4, maybe it's 37, 39, 41, 43, something like that. So you're going to have 2 years over 40, and then it averages out to 40-ish. So that's just something you have to keep in mind. So they might regret it. Like, I would not want to pay him $40 million. That's I think the most I said last night with Kobe was like 37, and that would be sort of a desperate Hail Mary move. But the Lakers are also in a desperate situation. There's no other way around it. Like they don't have all this time, all this, like the optionality is this summer. If they don't execute on the optionality, maybe next summer they have a little bit of it, but I don't think they can afford another gap year or transition year. Brian Farmer, thank you for the super chat. What about Zion and Luka? It's interesting. I think from a pick and roll perspective and offensive perspective, it's a great fit, and Luka would set Zion up with, it'd be Lob City 2.0, right? And it would be just an incredible offensive combination. Like the two things are, well, there's three things. One, I think first and foremost, Zion's health and the lack of, he was healthier this season, and it was his healthiest season in a while, but there's no assurances that he's going to age gracefully and be available just in general. So that's a major concern. Second thing would be for me, the defense of, I think in some small ball looks, Zion can be an effective defender, and in some traditional looks, he can be an effective defender. But overall, I would consider him more of a net negative on that end. And as we think about building out the roster from the starting point of Luka and Austin, I think you have to be careful adding in net negatives to prominent roles within the rotation. Now, maybe he could get back to being closer to the guy he was at Duke. I think we would have, I think we've seen flashes of that. I don't think we've seen it consistently. And again, like maybe with a smaller offensive role, he's able to give more on the defensive end. I just think there's a limitation there that I would be concerned with. I also think there's some overlap in general with, if he is more of a 4 defensively, Luka's also more of a 4, and like they just kind of, you want them sort of in the same role, and there's just a clash there to some degree. The other thing would just be the contract, where it's a high enough number. You would really be going all in on Luka, Austin, and Zion. And I don't know if that's a good enough trio to go all in on. So if it was Zion in the future, maybe on a smaller deal, I would be open to, but also depending on the cost, I have no idea what the cost would be, but yeah, I see what, like, it would be fun on offense, I would say, but defensively, I think there'd be concerns health-wise, and then the contract. Polestar, thank you for super chat. Fire Rob and ran by their cancer to the org. I'm gonna leave this one here, but you follow up here, so I will respond to this one. Our agent's not willing to talk to Rob. AD want a center. Luka want a center. What the hell's going on top of, if no LeBron, dark days ahead? I think for the second super chat here. I would not say that's the case right now. I think what is the case and has been the case for the last few years, and this is where, well, I was going to say I'll give the front office some grace, but it's of their own doing. So I even struggle to give them grace with this. But like, I think the Lakers have been in very compromised positions like each of the last few summers where they have very limited assets and they have very specific, obvious needs. And so the art of the negotiation, the art of the deal is, you have the back and forth, right? And you are trying to find the common ground. But I think the Lakers are entering a lot of these negotiations in terms of trades for players from a they're entering the battle with one arm tied behind their back, because it's very much like, okay, we clearly, like, you need a center. And if we don't give you the center, you're not getting the center. You're screwed. So like, then they ask for the moon, and the Lakers have been reluctant, especially in off seasons, to give up the moon. And they're like, well, maybe if we wait until closer to the trade deadline, it won't be the moon. It'll be, I don't know, I'm not going to continue this analogy, but it's just like the Lakers, like it's this constant tension of the Lakers have obvious needs. They have limited assets to get them. They're like constantly, they're trying to get these things while having limited draft picks and also having bad contracts. So like they can't get off the bat. They don't have the Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins contracts to dump. And then they also don't have the draft capital to spend a bunch on guys, or are like conservative with their draft capital. And it just leads to these situations where they don't have enough for certain guys, or they don't have the flexibility or whatever. And then you get into the season and sometimes those prices are going to decline. And that's where the Lakers, I think, have had more success, is like when the asking price drops and maybe the other team is as desperate for a different reason, they need to get off money or something, or they want to pick, or their season's over, then I think the Lakers have more leverage. But I think the Lakers are often entering a lot of conversations from a point of like no leverage or very little leverage. And they do have some leverage here with some of the restricted free agency situations, and they can be the dumping ground for teams that want to get off money. But I also don't know how many teams are willingly trying to help the Lakers or give them good players for free. Like it doesn't seem like people want to do that for a variety of reasons. So I wouldn't say agents aren't willing to talk to Rob, but to this latter point, I would say there have been some false promises in the past. There have been things that were asked for and not delivered on, to LeBron, to AD, and now potentially to Luka. And like at some point, the Lakers have boasted that they are this franchise that takes care of their stars, and they're the franchise that collaborates with their stars. And that's true to a degree. I'm not saying they have not done that at all, but if AD was, it was as telling as like I can remember. AD was always very honest with the media, but that was a pretty pointed Q&A there in terms of just being like straight up, like, I've been asking for a center for multiple years and they haven't given me one. And that was as direct as it got. And Luka clearly, last week, it comes out in 2 reports that Luka wants a center and Luka wants upgrades to the roster. And so the Lakers have to deliver on that. And I don't think going from DeAndre Ayton to Robert Williams or Mitchell Robinson is enough. And then to your last point, yeah, obviously, if it's going to be a tall task to replace LeBron. Like there might be some configurations where they're better set up for the future, but I think it's a narrow path to find a situation where they lose LeBron and improve the roster now. Well, but we'll see if that's how this all plays out. The Plop, thank you for the super chat. Vando, DK, and a swap from Miles Bridges get Kessler. If you could do that, I would be open to that. I repeat this every time I talk about Miles Bridges. Obviously, there's some off the court stuff that he will have to answer to, and the Lakers have been reluctant to bring on guys with certain pass in the past, depending on the situation. So that would be a factor that you have to weigh in. But from a fit perspective, I think is a really good fit. That to me would probably signal that if you're doing this, you are probably moving on from LeBron. I don't think Bridges would fit next to LeBron and Luka because I think they're all more fours defensively. So Bridges, if you're bringing in Bridges to be a four, that is a way that this works to me. Bridges is not really a three in my opinion. I don't think he's not that like lockdown wing defender. I think he's a solid defender, but I don't think he's like the answer on the perimeter necessarily. But overall, the athleticism, the offensive firepower, the shooting, he's a dynamic player. Like I like Bridges' game, and then Kessler, obviously, self-explanatory. RHL, dang, thank you for the super chat. While it's Walter's first year, he's on the clock with Luka. Is he really going to let Rob strike out this offseason, especially with how it looks right now? I do want to say, like, the Lakers operate, and let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, I've not missed anything, at least to my knowledge. I want to be careful here because right now, I think the Lakers need the equivalent of the Luka trade in terms of finding a center, right? So you're not finding a Luka level center. You're not getting the Wemby or the Jokic, but like I say the Luka trade in terms of like they need to go get the center that no one is expecting them to get, that no one knows is on the market. If you go back, Mark Williams was someone that people did not know was on the market. I think the week before, and this shows you how all this stuff works. I think it was like the week before, there was a report that Mark Williams was not available and that Charlotte was not shopping him and they wanted to keep him and they wanted to re-sign him. A week later, he gets traded for Dalton in the first on the swap. So the Lakers need something like that where it's a guy. I mean, maybe it is they get the Kessler or the Duren, or they get the Jared Allen somehow, and like they get the guy, the Derek Lively. Like Derek Lively, I feel like isn't being talked about that much because he's not even healthy. He was talking today about like his foot and stuff, but there is, like he's someone that is perceived to be a long-term piece for Dallas. And you got the Dallas LA history, of course, but someone like that, where like they need to pull a rabbit out of the hat with the center spot and be like, okay, you thought we were going to get you the Robert Williams or the Mitchell Robinson, but here's player X that people might not have thought was available, but we gave up 2 first-round picks and we got player X. Like they need something like that. So I think it's far too early to write off the Lakers offseason. I understand the concern. I agree that it is not trended in the right direction to start. They're like certainly the center game of musical chairs is not trending in the Lakers' direction right now, and I am concerned. I'm not going to lie about that, but I think it's too early to just write it off entirely. We have to see how it plays out. We have to give this some time, and then if we're having this conversation July 7th and the Lakers don't have a center or they have a backup center masquerading as a starter, then we could go into, okay, well, what does this mean? And like, how good is the team? What is this going to mean for Luka? What is this going to mean for the future? But I don't think it's time to have that conversation yet. But look, if he does strike out, then the Lakers are going to have a decision to make. And, maybe he gets the opportunity I think he would get an opportunity to try to fix it at the trade deadline. But if he doesn't, then obviously I think this is a pretty ruthless ownership group and, kind of executive level above the, coming in with the Dodgers and stuff. So maybe they choose to go in a different direction next summer. Like I don't know that to be certain, but obviously there's a ton of pressure to nail this summer. I think from, to your point, the ownership level, but also from the superstar level. Frankie Ocean, thank you for the super chat. Now that Austin has paid like a second option, if he gets injured or doesn't play like a true second option in the playoffs, there's no more excuses, right? I would agree. I would note that if you look at Austin's numbers against OKC compared to, you could look at other guards against OKC over the last couple of years, but you could also look at guards against OKC this specific postseason. Austin rates out pretty well in comparison to most of the high level guards against them. He's also, there was just the playoff, or there's metric about top 10 high volume drivers, and Austin, it was a list with like Shea and different high level guard scorers from the playoffs, where Austin led the group in field goal percentage on drives. So I do think some of the stuff with Austin's struggles, even this postseason, was a little bit overblown. Game one was a disaster against OKC. I think the first few games against Houston, he was still getting his footing back, and he got cooked defensively by AJ Mitchell. There's no denying that, and that I think that was the biggest blemish of everything. It would be either the turnovers or the defense, right? But after that game one, games 2 to 4, averaged 25 and 7, 51% shooting, 39% on threes. I think he more than held his own and was overall LA's best player through those 3 games. So, I get I get what you're saying though, and I've made this point. I think, especially looking at the last 2 years of the deal, I think based on his production, depending on where you want to cut off certain numbers, Austin's general numbers, there was like a group of 6 guys who hit those marks. There was a group of 11 guys that hit those marks. And we're talking about the Jokic's, the Lukas, the Sheas. Like, he was in a rare class offensively in terms of his overall points, assists, and shooting efficiency, that I think the people who discount Austin overlook that and just act like that doesn't exist for whatever reason. So I think he did play like a number 2 in the regular season. I don't think was quite to the level you would want as a number 2 in the playoffs. I do think there was an injury component of him coming off of that and just not being 100%. I think if he was just, in my opinion, clearly not 100%, but to this point, he was not 100% against Minnesota, and he's now dealt with some shooting stuff and injury stuff late in the season. So yes, like I agree that if he does not play up to a second option level, I think the injury context is important in terms of, like, if he's not available, obviously that's disappointing. And that is something that you have to factor in terms of his availability. But I mean, there aren't any more excuses. Like, he does have, I agree in the sense that Austin will be judged now on a max level basis and through a max level lens. And I think there have been times he's played up to that level. There's been times he has not. But that was on a $15 million, $14 million, $13 million contract. When you're making 41, 45, 49, 51, whatever, 48, 51, that's like, especially the high 40s and low 50s, that's hollowed ground. That's a certain class of player that the Lakers are betting on him continuing to play like the way he did the first couple months of the season, continuing to ascend. And if he does, then I think that will warrant the contract. If he doesn't, then obviously the Lakers are going to have to figure that out. But I agree with the premise of the question. I feel like some of the playoff stuff continues to be overblown, in my opinion. Shibugan, thank you for super chat. Okay, young guys with potential as opposed to zeros. Not quite sure what... unless you're talking about some of the minimum guys I was talking about, or I'm not quite sure what this is in reference to. John X, thank you for the super chat. If LAC does not exercise the team options, could they poach LeBron, Marcus, Rui, and trade to build around them? Could trade Garland, Kawhi? They could be a cap space player. I don't know if it... I'm not going to put myself, like, I don't know where the Clippers are at right now, but unless there's something coming with this aspiration situation, it doesn't, I don't see why they would necessarily move off Kawhi unless he's really pushing for that, or they just want to disassociate from him. But I think there's always like the political element, the rivalry element with the Clippers and Lakers. And I don't know if they want to trade Kawhi to the Lakers, but I don't think they'd trade Garland, although maybe now with the, with the new rookie coming in, maybe, but they did, give up. They didn't give up that much for Garland, but maybe. They definitely loom as a threat potentially, depending on what they do with their cap situation. I will say that, and like if John Collins leaves, they could easily go after Rui. I would say this. I don't think LeBron's going to go to the Clippers. I don't think, like, LeBron has taken shots at the Clippers multiple times throughout his career. I don't think LeBron, there's like a few teams where definitely to me, it's like the Clippers and the Celtics. I just don't see LeBron going to either one of those teams. So yeah, I don't think he would go there. What does it matter, bruh? Thank you for the super chat. RP stupidly punted on 2 years and 4 trade cycles for this offseason. If he doesn't get one of the top end free agents, he should be fired. No more hiding behind LeBron hate from the fandom. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say here, but I would definitely agree with the first part in terms of, I think you could argue they punted on longer than 2 years. Definitely punted on multiple trade cycles. I mean, if you go, again, like off-season trade cycles, they've been punting for years. In season, it's depended on the season. This past season, I would say they pseudo punted. Like it was a nice trade going from Gabe to Luke, but it wasn't a home run trade in my opinion. I mean, I don't know. I guess it was a home run trade by like relative standards, but I think the Lakers needed more than Luke Kennard. And then obviously the previous trade cycle in season was the Luka and DFS trade. So, that one I think was a grand slam. But yeah, I mean, there's no more excuses. I agree with that part. And I don't know where that's going to go in terms of his job security or his future. But if it's a disappointing or underwhelming offseason, then I think there will be some changes coming up. I'll say that. BT Kingsley, if Carr is who we think, we shouldn't overpay Peyton. I would say that they're different players and different positions. So I like Carr. I said I think it's one of the steals of the draft. I thought it was an awesome pick for the Lakers. I don't know that Carr is ever going to be as good or as valued as the current version of Peyton Watson. Like, it's possible, but Peyton Watson also is 6'8", 6'9", with a certain amount of length and athleticism at that size, that it's just, if you are 6'8", 6'9", with a certain amount of athleticism, a certain amount of scoring pop and shooting and defense, you're going to get paid a certain amount. Like, if Carr was as good as Watson, just by virtue of being 6'5" instead of 6'8", 6'9", like, that's just a less valuable player. Like, that's what makes Wemby is like, Wemby could do these things that guys 6'10" could do, but he's doing them at 7'5" or 7'6" or 8 feet. I don't know how tall he is. Like, that's what makes that's the Wemby proposition that's so enticing and incredible, is that he could do small player things at a bigger size. And because the object of the game is put the ball in the basket, prevent the ball from going in the basket, and the basket is 10 feet, size will always matter to a certain degree in terms of the guys who could operate and function like smaller players at a bigger size are more valuable. So I think that's putting the cart in front of the horse here in terms of, like, I think the Lakers would be very fortunate if Carr in a few years is viewed as a Peyton Watson type, commanding potentially $30 million in free agency. Like, I don't know if he's quite there, and part of it might just be the build where Watson's just bigger. But to that point, like, Watson to me is like a 3.5 and probably more of a 4 than a 3, but he can play either forward position. Carr's more of a 2, maybe a 2.5, who can potentially slide up and play some 3, especially if he fills out. But I would say for now, Carr is more locked in as a 2 guard, and Peyton could play either forward spot. So you could have both, and you could have 2 awesome athletes, 2 good shooters. In Watson's case, a good defender. In Carr's case, a developing defender, but a good defensive playmaker. I would say, why not have both? But I would not hold off on Watson for Carr, because even if Carr hits, I don't know that he's necessarily hitting this season. It might be a season or 2 thing. Like, I mean, I don't see any universe in which Carr is as good as Peyton Watson this upcoming season. So you're making a longer term bet on something that you don't even know is going to happen. And now it could be reason to, well, I wouldn't even say that. I think in general, the Lakers are going to prioritize the center spot and try to get the center spot, and then the wing spot's going to be a secondary concern for them. But there's also an argument that if you can't find the center, you have to find the wing. And these are just the things they're going to have to figure out in the next 4 days, because we're 4 days away from this all being resolved, or theoretically in the process of being resolved. Follows up, BT Kingsley, need some players others want, even if just to trade. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, that's where the Lakers need to build out the back end of the roster and find, you get the Josh Minot and he hits, and then you either have a player on an awesome contract or you flip him for something. That's how this works. But the Lakers have not, you lost out on the asset with Dalton Connect. You lost out on the asset with Jalen Hood-Schifino. You've traded all these second round picks for Rui, I think was a positive, but for DFS, which led to Jake and some of the moves last summer, but you still could use those second round picks. And even the Luke trade, depending on if they keep Luke or not, they've just wasted a ton of assets over the last few years that have not really amounted to anything. And they've also missed on picks and young guys. And then you hit on some young guys, you lose Jordan Goodwin, you have Jay Huff and Scottie Pippen Jr. in-house. You don't retain either of those guys. That's to say nothing of, again, the Dalton and JHS picks. It's just been miss after miss after miss in the young player department. And maybe here with Adu and Cameron Carr, they found a couple hits, but they got to start getting some of those hits, because there's a reason why they have a pretty depleted asset chest right now. And then BT Kingsley, what if it's Mitch Robb, Robert Williams, and you could combine those two to Mitch Williams and Jax. I do like it a lot in theory. You have the general injury concerns. I still think you have 3 backup centers that you're trying to. Pete Zayas on today's Lakers Collective had a great. It's I don't want 2 centers in a trench coat pretending to be a starter. That's kind of how I feel about this general build. It can work. I would say though, the one thing here would be potentially opportunity cost, where I think Mitchell Robinson and Robert Williams are probably going to combine for at least 25, 26 million. And that could be on the low side potentially, combined. So if you're at 48, 50, 52 million in cap space, that's half your cap space already between those two guys, without factoring in, are you keeping LeBron? Are you keeping Rui? Are you keeping Luke? Are you keeping Marcus? Obviously, Luke or Marcus could potentially be a room exception guy, but it's just, you might not be able to afford the Peyton Watson, or I'd prefer one of those guys plus the Peyton Watson or something. I don't know if I want to go double backup big, but that might just be the way that they have to go. So I'm not fully opposed to this. I just think, to me, this would be a pretty disappointing outcome of just, you have 3 backup centers and 2 of them are elite. I think Mitchell Robinson and Robert Williams are both top 5 backup centers in the league. I think Jackson Hayes is a top half backup center in the league, but they're still backups. And that is, I think, the central issue here. Keith Tate, thank you for the super chat. Do you think they're sending the Williams trade has hurt Rob's ability to make trades with other teams? Yes, I do. And I think there's been, there's actually a different version of this was the Russ trade, which people kind of forget, but Sacramento thought that the Lakers were trading for Buddy Hield, and they had depending on who you talk to, there's different versions of the event, but there is a version from the Sacramento side that they had verbally agreed to the trade. Sacramento had the press release ready. The social team, the graphics team, all that stuff was getting the stuff ready for the incoming Lakers players. And then at not even the 11th hour, past the 11th hour, basically at the 12th hour, or even 12:01, the Lakers pull the plug and go with the Westbrook trade. So there has been some stuff in terms of just rescinding trades, and that I think that kind of becomes a mark on your record with the other executives of, even if we agree to something, we don't know that it's actually going to go through until it officially goes through that. And even if it goes officially through, there might be a rescindment with it. So I think I will defend Rob here and defend the Lakers in the sense of, I think they made the right call ultimately with the Williams trade. in terms of rescinding it, like he is, I think it would have been a mistake to go all in with him. Like you right now, you'd probably be in a situation where you have to pay him, where you saw already the market, like he's going to be in that Robert Williams, Mitchell Robinson range financially, and you would have one fewer first and one fewer swap right now. So you'd have one first to trade and two swaps instead of three. So like you'd be in a depleted asset spot where you'd have to retain him. I don't think he's good enough for what you want or need. So I think it was ultimately the right call, but it's also something where there is like this unspoken thing with, there's a reason why rescinding a trade is so rare, and it was such a big deal that the Lakers did that. And I do think that does at least cast a little doubt in some of the talks of like, is this a situation that's actually going to be followed through with? And I think that is something that has been a factor, at least to my knowledge, going back to last season. And then final few here. Christian, thank you for the super chat. Scenario where we trade for Turner and Ware. That's an interesting one, because they could view, like if you gave up a first and you are like, we're giving up a first in theory for Ware, and we're letting you get off of Turner by attaching him to Ware, is that, like, I think you'd have to give something up here. I don't think they're like, oh, well, we'll attach Ware instead of a first. I think they'd probably value Ware more than a first. So it would be, I think, something like Turner and Ware, and then the Lakers are sending out a first. But instead of having to send out two firsts maybe for Ware, you're sending out one and getting Turner back. That would be a way I would be more open to Turner, because you could have it. I think Ware should start over Turner if this is how it goes. But if he's not quite ready for that role, he could be a backup and then play his way into being a starter. I still don't love Turner as potentially a backup, and then you will have to pay Ware soon. So I think you're still in a situation where you'd eventually want to get off that Turner contract and probably have to attach an asset. But this would make it more palatable to me, because I think Ware is as close to the ideal modern big, like non-all-star edition as it gets. Rim running lob threat, rebounder, shot blocker, three-point shooter. Certainly some motor and processing issues that are concerning, and that's why Miami had to put more stuff in that deal for Giannis, right? It wasn't like Ware was this blue chip crown jewel, but I would be open to something like that, depending on, like, I don't think I would give up both firsts for this, because again, I think the Turner contract is such a negative. But if it was one first and you got Ware and you had to take on Turner, I'd be okay with that. BT Kingsley, Luka, AR, Kelly O, Collins, Mitch, Smart, Keon, Luke, Robert Williams, Jax. So, okay, so you lose LeBron, you lose Rui, and you have, let's just say, $52 million in cap space, but you get off DA. We'll optimistically say like $58 million in cap space. Kelly and Collins and Mitch, I would say the average annual is probably 15-ish combined with those three. I could see Collins being over the non-taxpayer MLE, Mitch close to it, maybe a little under, and then Kelly somewhere in that general range too. So let's just say, for argument's sake, it's about 45 million combined. That's 45 of your 58. You have 13 left. That would include then the money you're spending on Keon, Luke, and Robert Williams, which I don't think is enough for them. So I would say I don't think you have enough here. I mean, if we get like really conservative, maybe Kelly's around the 10 mark. I still think Collins is going to go close to the full non-taxpayer MLE, like 14, 15 range at a minimum, but potentially above that, especially in a cap space situation. I mean, maybe it's closer to 40 for those three, but you still then have like 18 left for Keon, Luke, and and Williams, which I don't know. I don't know if that's enough for those three. So I think you probably have to pick between Keon Ellis and Luke Kennard, and then you just decide if you want more defense or shooting. But something like this could work and be realistic. And I do like the John Collins fit as a shooter, as an athlete, as a rebounder, as a multi-positional defender. I like Kelly Oubre. I think you're probably starting a couple of bench players, and ideally, to me, like Oubre and Mitch are bench guys, and you have some depth. You're definitely deeper than last year, but you don't have the same top end talent. Like I look at who's your third best player here. It's John Collins or Kelly Oubre, right? Like, or do you Marcus Smart arguably but it's probably John Collins. And I think when you look at, would you have San Antonio saying their third best player is Stephon Castle or Dylan Harper, and you have OKC saying their best player is J-Dub or Chet, like it's just not even in the same stratosphere. So that's like just a limitation with this build. So I'm kind of coming around to like, I think the Lakers are probably just gonna have a more top heavy build. And that's where, again, finding some of those cheaper guys on minimum contracts is going to be really important. LA 824. I think the super chat, one, draft's over, but hypothetically, what if the Lakers traded up for Mara, also landed Vassar, then signed Mitchell Robinson? And then two, initial thoughts on iHeart's new 3-year extension. I'll start with the second one first. I thought it was a home run extension for OKC. I think if he hit the open market, he doesn't really fit with Chicago or Brooklyn, so maybe they would have, Chicago obviously got Nick Claxton, but I think the Lakers would, I'd rather have, Kessler depends on the number, but I would say I'd probably rather have iHeart at like 30 than Kessler at 40. If it's Kessler at like 35, 37, I'd rather just have Kessler. And if it's like Duran at the max or like 40 plus, I'd rather just have iHeart around 30 or so. So I think it's a fair deal for OKC. For iHeart, like you weren't going to be able to test the market. You couldn't be like rejected. Like OKC was going to have to decide he wasn't going to be part of their future. And I just didn't think that was realistic with how important he is and was during their championship run, during their playoff run to the conference finals this past year. So like it's probably a win-win for both sides. He is someone who's dealt with some injuries, so there is some risk there that maybe if he has another injured year, maybe a down year, that his value next summer wouldn't have been the same. So he does get some security. He does get it locked up. I think it's probably a little bit low for his actual value on an open market, but he was not in a situation to hit the open market. So OKC, I think, controlled that, played their cards right. But I guess if you go back to Mara and Vassar and Robinson, yeah, Mara to me is a little bit of a wild card in terms of, I think he's going to be good. I don't know how good he's going to be from day one, right? Like I think maybe the natural comparison to some degree is like a Zach Edey, and Edey did come in and look like a starter pretty early. So you did have his growing pains that he went through at times, but like was pretty good from the jump. And so maybe that's how this goes for Mara as well. But you just never know. So, with I think rookie bigs and rookie point guards in particular, there's like a learning curve with point guards, it's like running pick and rolls, making reads and handling ball pressure, athleticism. With bigs, it's not fouling as much, verticality, how physical it is in the paint, all those different things. Like it's just a learning curve for a rookie. So I would say like this is better than some of the other builds, especially if it's like in general, I prefer Robert Williams to Mitchell Robinson. I think he's better on both sides of the ball. So especially if you flip in Robert Williams here, I would like that build even more. But yeah, it's an interesting build. You do have a certain amount of skill, certain amount of size, certain amount of rebounding. I'm lower on Vassar than consensus, although he slipped pretty far in the draft. So it seems like consensus, at least at the NBA level, is a little low on him too. Although part of that was him trying to get to different situation. Yeah, I thought that would have been fine. Not my ideal build. I still would prefer like the Kessler outcome, but that would have been the thing is like to trade up for Mara, you would have had to have given up, I think, a future first, and then you would have one fewer asset this summer. So I guess you would have settled your center spot, but you would be betting on two rookies, and you'd have one fewer asset to fill out the rest of the roster. But yeah, I think it's just a gamble to bet on like two rookies being part of a three-headed committee. Tuzi, could LA trade for players who have been traded already? Yes, they can. I mean, yeah, as long as it's not like a sign and trade, like once you sign somewhere, or if it's a sign and trade, then there's a restriction. But anyone that's been traded could technically. So yeah, I mean, they could still be in on Nick Claxton. I just think after getting him for nothing at Chicago, you're going to want something. So I do think, based on, I think Claxton has whatever Claxton's price was for Brooklyn. I think it'll be higher for Chicago, and clearly Brooklyn was fine just dumping him. But Chicago is going to want an asset, and I don't think it's going to be as simple as like, oh, here's a second round pick for Claxton. Like I think it's probably going to cost something that the Lakers might not necessarily want to give up when they could have just potentially taken him on for free. But yeah, I mean, that's an example of a traded player that you could take on. Thank you for the super chat. All in on Kessler and go get Kelly Oubre. I'm fine. Like, I think between the two, I'm probably more in favor with getting the good big and settling a little bit on the wing than the inverse. But I mean, you could argue that bigs are easier to find value, where on the wing spot, it's just wings are expensive. So I get that argument as well. I just think all the elite teams in the league have elite centers, and I think the Lakers need to get on that level. Jerry Soriano, your lender for life. Thank you for the super chat. You like the BR, LAL, Miami, Utah, Kessler, LeBron trade? I do. I think that's the best realistic outcome if you do lose LeBron. And it's also trying to, I think it's because it would have to be a sign and trade. It's also working with LeBron to get him to somewhere where he wants to be. And I think if both sides come to the conclusion that, hey, it's like the Lakers are like, we want to move on to the next era with Luka. LeBron's like, I want to be in a situation where I feel more respected and prioritized, or have a certain role within the offense that I might not have in LA. Then I think that can make sense for both sides. For LA, you get Kessler and Wiggins, which I think is about as realistic of like a best case scenario from a center and wing perspective that LA could get. Like I can't think of another outcome on like realistic out. Like you're not getting Kessler and Watsons, right? So depending on how you feel about Wiggins, like, I don't know, Tari Eason or Herb Jones, I don't think you could afford Suggs and Kessler. So that's not really in play. But looking at like the realistic wings that are potentially available, the realistic centers, I think the best Venn diagram or close to it is some form of Kessler and Wiggins. And so if the Lakers do go down the road of moving on from LeBron and trying to help facilitate him getting to a destination that he wants to be in, I think this is about as good as it realistically gets. The Tribe, thank you for the super chat. Let's be honest, we already have our guy. Jokic went late in the second round. Our guy went undrafted. Robbie will be poor man's all-star level Jokic. Look, if the Lakers hit and he's Jokic, yeah, I mean, one can dream, but I would also argue Jokic did have the Jokic body type coming in. Jokic kind of developed the Jokic body type. He's already the fully formed. He's the evolved Pokemon. So we'll see. We'll see what he looks like in Summer League before we start comparing him to Jokic. The final one, TT or T-Toss, thank you for the super chat. You think LeBron is a Laker next season? Odds. So I said, I want to say it was a show ago, that someone asked for a breakdown. I think I said 55% staying in LA, 40% elsewhere, 5% retirement, just because I think until we know he's for sure coming back, we have to leave some small percentage of the chance he retires. I would probably update that now to 50, 45, 5. So I guess I'm inherently saying it's a 50-50 proposition that he's back in general, but more specifically comparing, if we eliminate retirement, we just say, okay, he's not retiring. I would say to me, it's probably something like 53-47, him coming back. But I do think, I said this on Lakers Collective, and I continue to stand by this. Like the Lakers, we know, like I've heard things behind the scenes. People have heard things behind the scenes, reported certain things. But if we just go at face value with how the Lakers are moving, how they're operating, they prioritized keeping Austin Reeves and ultimately signed him to a max. They are now scouring the market for a center or a high-level wing. And I mean, it just like, and when we talk about, like, if they get the Kessler, they get the Watson, they get the Duren, or they trade for someone that we don't even think is available, that's almost certainly going to cost them LeBron, or at a minimum is going to heavily cost LeBron's next contract. Because if you do sign Kessler to the 35 or the 40, that's a huge chunk of your cap space gone. And now at best, you're potentially offering LeBron a $15 million contract or $20 million contract, when right now you could obviously pay him more than that. So I think based on the recent reporting from Shams from a couple of days ago that LeBron and the Lakers have had like one conversation during all this, combined with just the way the Lakers are moving in general, and like not, I said this earlier, but it feels like the Lakers want LeBron back, view it as a nice to have, but it's not a necessity. It's not like this giant priority for them. And it could be wrong. Like, they could agree to terms in the next 5 minutes. And then that obviously was not the case, but at least based on the signals they've been sending out there and just some of the noise, it's like they're not moving like a team that would be like devastated if LeBron was not on the roster next year. And I think that's a departure from where they've been in the past and where LeBron has been for his entire career. Like, he's always been a guy that you like needed to have on your roster. And that's not to say that he's not that guy still, but at least for the Lakers, the way that they're operating, like, it doesn't seem like they view him in that light. So based on that, I feel like I could see LeBron feeling a bit offended, being, feeling a bit disrespected, underappreciated, undervalued, and he's well within his right to test free agency and go elsewhere if that's how he feels. And like, I understand why he would feel that way. I also understand the Lakers side of they're trying to juggle like being, competing for a title and also building for the future with Luka and Austin. And those things are somewhat on, the same timeline and somewhat not. And so they're trying to kind of thread this fine needle of, but look, I mean, if you lose LeBron, you better make sure that next year's roster is as good, if not better, than, the version that would have had LeBron on it. Like, that, I think, is the biggest thing for the Lakers is if you make, if you choose that path, I don't think you could take this massive step back and just be like, all right, well, next summer, next year, we'll build out the roster. Like, this year, we had to move on, and but you can't have a gap year. You can't have a transition year. So if they move on from him, they better build a better roster. But with all that said, I'm going to wrap here. Appreciate you guys for rocking with me. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. About 60% of you who watch are subscribed, but the other 40% of you who watch are not yet subscribed. So it means the world to me to hit that subscribe button. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow with West tiers heading into free agency. So we're going to do a quick breakdown of where I have the Lakers in the West and the overall West hierarchy. Then I will follow it up post free agency with an updated list of how I view the rest of the West. So be on the lookout for that. But I will talk to you all tomorrow. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to the late night gang.